Dr. Latt, happy to be recording with you again. Very excited to sit down today. We are doing a deep dive into this new study on ketones, post-exercise recovery, angiogenic signaling. You and I were texting about this before it was released. You said, hey, a couple weeks, like let's schedule a podcast because this paper's going to come out. So we knew this was in the pipeline, knew it was coming out. Use Ketone-IQ. I've been excited about it, dove into it the first day it was published. So the title of the study, Ketosis Enhances Vascular Function, Angiogenic Signaling, and the Erythropoietic Response to Exercise and Hypoxia. This was published in the journal Physiology by a group from KU Leuven. They published a lot of the studies on exogenous ketones. But this one, especially exciting, especially for Ketone-IQ, because it was one of the first studies using Ketone-IQ for exercise recovery. So why don't you just kind of like introduce us to this study a little bit, to tell us what they did, sort of maybe what the rationale behind it was, and maybe I'd love it if you could give us maybe a little bit of a background, like where does this idea of using ketones for recovery come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is literally fresh off the press. It just came out less than a week ago. And also good job on pronouncing the title, because that was one take.
Yeah.
That was one take because the erythropoietic word was quite a mouthful. So this study was conceived in conjunction with our partnership with Visma Lease a Bike, which is a big team out there in Europe for the Tour de France, a bunch of elite cyclists, and they use ketones specifically for recovery. And I think it was around 2019 or 2020, Gilles Poffet published a paper showing that ketones or exogenous ketones increases work output after 3 weeks being used as a recovery strategy. And that was basically mitigating overreaching symptoms as well. So we know that ketones, to a certain extent, help with recovery. But how does it help recovery and what mechanism is involved? We have no idea. And then on another side of research, also with Gilles Poffet, they looked at high altitude and hypoxia, and they saw that when given exogenous ketones, these people are adapting to hypoxia much better. So between those two, it's like there is some mechanism in there that is helping people recover faster, but also helping regulate oxygen regulatory mechanism better. That obviously will help with energy generation, because energy generation needs oxygen. And if you are recovering, if you are needing to produce ATP in order to replenish anything that you've used during your exercise, during your training, obviously that will come in very handy. So this is where the whole idea of like, okay, let's have a study that looks specifically at Ketone-IQ, because Ketone-IQ, it's still new. I mean, we came out in 2022. So it's only been 4 years. And as you know, these studies take at least a year to run it for data collection, data analysis, and then takes probably another half a year to get it published. So it's a long time coming. And I was so excited that we finally got published and peer reviewed. And we're not even, remotely involved in terms of data collection, data analysis, so that everything is very unbiased. It's completely run by the university. And this is where we thrive, the scientific integrity with the rigorous data that shows how ketone can improve recovery, specifically in macrovascular, microvascular function, and also in erythropoietin functions.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned about the sort of the KU Leuven and the Visma Lease a Bike being independent of Ketone-IQ. I mean, obviously, like they're working in kind of conjunction with you all, but I was actually looking at the paper on my way here. I'm like, oh well, I was wondering if you were on the paper, but I'm like, no, there's nobody from Ketone-IQ is on the paper. It's just these researchers at the university. And also, I think with a lot of studies in nutrition, it's like you see it's funded by the egg industry. Well, of course they want positive results for eggs, but I think that since they're working with this Lease a Bike team, they don't want to produce a favorable result just because Ketone-IQ wants to see it. They want something real because they're professional cyclists riding in the Tour de France. If ketones work, like they want to know whether they work. They don't want to just fool themselves or be subject to like a placebo effect or something like that.
Correct.
They want to know if these are actually working for their team.
Exactly. No, that's the whole point, because the Hill Parfait, who's the main person overseeing the study, he worked directly with the head of nutrition, head of training, head of performance with Vis Van Liesebike to really disseminate what areas they want to really look at. Like, why are my athletes improving when they use Ketone-IQ for recovery? And there's no point faking it. If it doesn't improve it, then they'll be like, well, it doesn't. So, and they have no stakes in Ketone-IQ, even though we are the ones sponsoring the study. So, let us make that very clear and very transparent how the structure works here, because everyone stands to gain something from the transparency and from the scientific integrity of knowing how the ketone science, move forward, or how this product works. But nobody will gain anything by faking the data.
Exactly. And I think, so this is an area, you mentioned the study that came out in 2019. It's interesting. That was kind of the first time I started using ketones, at least for the purposes of recovery, because I was in graduate school at that time, and a couple buddies of mine, we wrote like a commentary on that article about ketones and overtraining, because I read that study. I'm like, oh, well, this is super cool. Like taking these ketones during overtraining, being an endurance athlete, I was like, this is directly applicable to me, in addition to the potential benefit for performance. But that's when I started taking them for recovery. So it's kind of just been this theme over the last few years of like this development of, oh, this may be like a super, interesting application of ketones.
Just a quick recap for your audience as well, for those who do not know this paper. So essentially, what Heal did back in 2019 is that they put these cyclists on training regimes, and then 30 minutes after the training and also 30 minutes before bed, they were giving exogenous ketones for 3 weeks. And then they measured the work output at the end of 3 weeks, and they saw a 15% increase in work output after using exogenous ketone as a recovery strategy. So that was, as you said, the first paper that kind of clicked. It's like, oh, this is not just an acute energy drink that you can just have a shot and then you just go boom, like caffeine, but it actually helps you recover and adapt to the training that you've been doing.
Yeah, and this is a whole new, I think it's an area that people really need to be aware of and sort of understand. We're separating now the effects of ketones sort of as a direct fuel, because ketones can be used by skeletal muscle, the brain, the heart as a source of energy. But this field is kind of investigating them for a different reason, as signaling molecules. Obviously, you can't never fully separate the fuel effects from the signaling effects, but in a way, we're not saying if you take ketones, do they give you more energy and allow you to like exercise harder or longer? It's, what are they doing in the body after exercise, during exercise to help you adapt better? So with that being said, why don't we go into the methods of this study? I think the methodology was pretty cool. They had 17, I believe it was 17 participants in the study. So not a huge study, but again, with exercise training studies like this and whatnot, especially with like a professional cycling team, you're not going to get hundreds of participants. But let's break down the study methods, if you wouldn't mind, and talk about what they did, kind of the different control arms, the intervention arms in the study.
Yeah, I believe it's a crossover study. So the same athletes did both Ketone-IQ and placebo with a washout period. What they did on test day is that they had a high intensity interval training for 2 hours. So really exhaustive exercise. And then they were, given exogenous ketones and rest for an hour before they got shoved into a chamber. They do not know whether this chamber is hypoxic or normoxic. So normoxic is normal oxygen level, hypoxic is low oxygen level. So this whole idea is basically trying to figure out how would they react to low oxygen environment while recovering from the training. And during that course as well, multiple measurements were taken. They were taken blood to look at blood metabolites. They also did muscle biopsies. They also measured the common femoral blood flow, looking at how fast, if Ketone-IQ increases blood flow on the macrovascular level. And they measured from the blood as well. They measured the signaling molecules that are involved with angiogenesis, which is new blood vessel formation. So that's more microvascular. So how potent is ketone-IQ in helping you build blood vessels in order to increase oxygenation into your muscles while you recover. And then that, we looked at muscle biopsies as well. And then they also measured endothelin-1, and that is a very interesting area, which is very new. Endothelin-1 is a signaling molecule that constricts blood vessel. What we have seen is that ketone-IQ actually inhibits endothelin-1, allowing the blood vessels to vasodilate. And as your blood vessels expands, it obviously increases blood flow, and that increases muscle reoxygenation. One of the cool things that they did also is the occlusion technique, where they occlude the thigh of the athletes so that they restrict blood flow. And then they release it, and then they look at blood reperfusion, and they look at how fast oxygenation occurs with and without ketone-IQ. And they saw an improvement with ketone-IQ, which is super cool.
Yeah, the reoxygenation rate is probably one of the more interesting measurements. Like, what's the significance of that for, say, exercise recovery? If people are kind of interested in like the reoxygenation, like is this test applicable? Like, what is that showing in terms of recovery?
I think it's in terms of recovery. It's as I said earlier, oxygen is needed for ATP generation. So the more oxygen you get during recovery, the better, the more ATP you can create. And the more ATP you can create, it will then be used for muscle fibers regeneration, glycogen replenishment, damage recovery, inflammation control. All of that will then contribute towards the recovery and therefore the adaptation to the training itself. And then over a chronic period of time, you are now building a cumulative benefit that will result in better performance over like say 3 weeks. For example.
Great explanation. But yeah, so the endothelin-1, it's interesting. So you have ET1, as which you mentioned. Most people are then aware of nitric oxide. So if you increase nitric oxide, that's going to allow the blood vessels to expand. Ketone-IQ, as you mentioned, is kind of working not by boosting nitric oxide per se, but like inhibiting endothelin-1. So you can kind of do both. ET1 constricts, so you inhibit it, you get more vasodilation. And then they measured the other signaling molecules. So they measured PGC1 alpha in, I think, the muscle biopsies. They measured AMPK, VEGF. So those are all interesting too, because PGC1 alpha, like kind of the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis, capillarization. Same thing with like AMPK. So if ketone-IQ is having effects through these signaling metabolites as well, it's like you're kind of getting this mitochondrial stimulation with ketones when combined with exercise, potentially too. So I kind of a comprehensive suite of measures that they did here. I mean, the macrovascular function stuff, very interesting. Interesting too, because ketones priorly, ketone esters, but have been shown to improve vascular function when given to people with obesity. I think for several weeks they improved vascular function. So there's a lot of kind of mechanistic insight here and like why it might actually work.
And so far, there's only one paper prior to this that showed butanediol, specifically independent of BHB, increases vasodilation, but that has only been shown in animals. So that has been published. But then we're like, well, a lot of people kind of debate, okay, it's not in humans, it's not translatable. Well, now you get it. You get the mechanism and you get the effects. And another treat for you is that this study was so comprehensive that we're getting 2 papers out of this.
Great.
So this is the first paper. So the second paper will
We're teasing around 2 podcasts.
Yeah, we are looking more around transcription factors and transcriptomics and genomics and how ketone-IQ affected more than 300 different genes. I haven't looked at the data analysis yet, but the manuscript is currently getting written to be published. So I believe I'm also a co-author on that, which is super cool.
Awesome. Yeah, something to look forward to. So you mentioned we have these 4 arms in the study. So in all the participants completed all the arms, which is important, again, the crossover study. So they did the exercise. They were all like high intensity interval training sessions. And again, to note for people, this wasn't a training study. It was more, let's look at the acute response. So we don't know whether they're adapting better over, say, several weeks, although, hopefully that's going to happen. You could extrapolate that potentially. So they had these 4 different arms. They exercised, and then 2 of those arms, they took ketones after exercise in either hypoxia or normoxia. And then in 2 of them, they took a placebo, so it tasted like Ketone-IQ, but it didn't have butane-diol in it, in hypoxia and normoxia. So these 4 kind of clean arms. Dosing, let's talk about that because I think that is important. So in the ketone arms, they did, and correct me if I'm wrong, Latt, but I think I remember these numbers because I kind of memorized them because people are always asking about it when you like post about a study like this on social media.
Of course.
It was I say 0.3, but it was 0.29 grams per kilogram of body weight every hour for the first 3 hours. So they had 3 doses in the first 3 hours, and then 0.15 grams per kilogram for the next 2 hours. So they had 5 bolus doses of ketones.
I believe so.
Yeah.
If you look at the diagram, like it will, you can see
yes,
it.
5 of them. So 3 large doses, 0.29 grams per kilogram. 2 more doses after that at hour 3 and 4. Those were 0.15 grams per kilogram.
I would say for that protocol, it's definitely on the higher end. You might not even need that much to maintain ketosis. What we wanted was to make sure that the blood ketones do not drop at all. And because they are sedentary, you probably don't need that much ketones, but we want to cover all bases.
Right, and the goal was to keep it between 2 to 4 millimolar of BHB blood ketones.
Yeah.
Because I know you published a review article before, it was somewhat speculation, but obviously grounded in data that that's sort of like this recovery range where you probably would see these benefits between 2 to 4 millimolar. So you were trying to maintain it between that.
Yeah.
And again, you mentioned, I think what you brought up was pretty interesting in that if you were just resting, you may not need as high of a dose to maintain ketosis as, say, if you were actually engaging in exercise, because your body is not, you're going to use them quicker if you're exercising versus just sitting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if you have the other day I tried a continuous keto monitor, which was super, super cool, and see like every night when I have 2 shots, it goes up to like 1.1, 1.5, and then it maintains for like 8 hours.
While you're sleeping.
While I'm sleeping.
Wow.
And then I wake up at 0.5 after 8 hours. So I'm very happy with that.
That's
and then
very
I'll
cool.
have 1 with caffeine, 1 without caffeine, do my fasted workout, and it shoots up again. And I can see it throughout the day how even though I'm not on a keto diet at all, I'm in fact on a quite high carb diet, and I can maintain my ketones from 0.3 to 0.5 even without top up, and then with top up it'll go up to like 1.5.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
So
CK.
looking at this study, I think I would definitely argue the next step, what would it be? It would be like, what is the minimal optimal dose that you need to induce the same changes?
Yeah, and I would argue that it would probably be that 0.15 gram per kilogram dose, because they used those 2 smaller doses at hour 3 and 4, and they were maintaining their ketosis level. So the 0.3 probably not needed. But so just
or just have less
dosing,
maybe every 2 hours for 0.3, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways that you could do it. You could do a steady
Slice and
stream
dice.
of a very tiny dose every 30 minutes. I mean, however you wanted to do it. But for me, when I take them, I just prefer a single large. I just take it like within 30 minutes of my workout, and then I don't usually keep doing repeated dosing. Of course, I'm not in like a, doing a study on myself, but that's typically how I do it. But, for reference, so a 0.3 grams per kilogram, I'm, say 65 kilograms. So for me, that's about a 20 gram dose of ketones. And then that smaller dose then would be like a 10 gram. So Ketone-IQ shot, every hour.
Yeah, you're the perfect specimen, literally.
Shot is
I think, while we're on this topic, talking about dosing, I think you are going to probably get a lot of questions around like, so what's the takeaway from this study? How should I dose it? Obviously, I'm not going to dose it 5 times, during my recovery period.
Right, most people aren't going to do that.
Exactly. So what I would do is take 0.3 grams per kilogram body weight 30 minutes before your workout, like you said. I would usually take 20 grams before. I'm a 70 kilo, so that's a little bit lower. I'll take it 30 minutes before my workout, but I work out in the evening, so about 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. kind of time. And then I won't take any until before bed. So I'll take it, less than half an hour before bed. I'll take another 20 grams. So that's 0.3, just two dose. And that was enough, according to my continuous keto monitor, to maintain above 1. So now the question begs the question: do we need 2 to 4 millimolar, or is above 1 enough?
Yeah, that would be an interesting next question. But yeah, I would say for people who are interested in sort of applying these results, and we're going to get to the actual results soon, but if they're interested in doing a similar protocol, you can buy ketone test strips and see like what dose gets you into that range, and like how long do you stay in it, and then sort of kind of like replicate these. You may not need 0.3. It depends a lot on maybe what you're eating, how hard the exercise was. So many variables that go into this. So this is just one protocol used in the study that they found to be effective. Again, most people aren't going to do 5 doses of that heavy dose. You'll go through some Ketone-IQ product pretty quickly doing that, but some people may want to actually do that dose.
And also, just to clarify as well, the reason why they dosed it so frequently is also to couple it with their previous results or previous study on hypoxia, because a lot of people find that they adapted to hypoxia better with the more frequent and higher dosing.
I see. Yeah. So the hypoxia and normoxia, could you maybe just give us a brief breakdown before we get into the results of like why do they have these two? Why do they have hypoxia and normoxia? Or couldn't they just keep them in a regular room? What were they looking at?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point is to, when you run a study, you want as many data points as possible, right? And as we know, a lot of these athletes, especially Tour de France, they'll be cycling in high altitude as well, and they'll be training in high altitude. And high altitude training, was it live low, train high, or live high, train low?
Yeah, live high, train low.
Live high, train low. There you go. Clearly, I'm not an endurance athlete. But that is what we want to investigate. If you couple it with altitude training, will it help you? Is it additive? Does it diminish it? But now we know it is actually additive. You are getting the improvement from the hypoxic training, from the altitude training, but you're also getting the improvement from ketones on top of that. So that's the whole logic and rationale behind it. Because we know that, as we said, oxygen is important. So if you shove these people in low oxygen environment, how would they adapt to this environment? And how does ketone help them adapt to this environment?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And if you are going by that live high, train low philosophy, that's literally what the study was looking at, because they didn't do the exercise in hypoxia. They exercised in normoxia, and then the recovery was in hypoxia. So that would be similar to probably maybe what a lot of these cyclists are doing.
So basically you're giving as much stimulus as possible to your body.
Exactly.
And then let your body adapt to it. And the end goal is like, I want more EPO, I want more red blood cells, I want more muscle oxygen delivery, I want more blood vessels in order to provide the muscles with all the nutrients and substrates. But in order to get there, I'm going to first exhaust myself and show that, activate all these exercise related signals, and then I'm going to activate all these environment related signals, and then I'm going to see the effects.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the key thing here, is that all of the results that we're going to talk about, all of these effects, exercise does them, hypoxia does them to some extent. So what we're asking here is, do ketones just like give you an upgrade basically to all of these effects that are happening? And that's what we're going to talk about now. So let's get into the results, because I think we've done a pretty good breakdown of the methods here. So results, let's go like with the vascular function stuff first, because I think that was kind of some of the primary outcomes there. You had the macrovascular function, like you mentioned, and then some of the microvascular function things. So why don't we go over maybe what changed and a few things that perhaps didn't change in the study?
Sure. From what I remember from the study is that after exercise, they saw that Ketone-IQ increased the common femoral blood flow, which is the arteries in the thigh, common femoral artery, increasing blood flow by 37%, I believe. And then during recovery, Ketone-IQ increases by 24%. So, which makes sense, because while you're exercising, like you just came off exercise, your blood flow is gonna get increased, because your body is like, dying for all these nutrients and all this oxygen. And then during recovery, it slows down a little bit, but Ketone-IQ actually increases the blood flow in both. And as we talk about, endothelin 1 and vasodilation, that's probably has a big role in this macrovascular function. And then in terms of microvascular function, we're looking at all these different signals that helps with new blood vessel formation. So capillaries, we're looking at small little branches that comes out of these arteries that essentially helps diffuse nutrients and oxygen into the muscles. And we saw an improvement in that as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting finding for the femoral artery endothelial function was that they didn't see that the diameter actually widened during that test. So you mentioned the test, basically you're cutting off blood flow to the thigh and then releasing it and seeing the blood flow. They didn't notice that the artery actually widened any larger during that, but they saw more vascular conductance, or basically like the velocity of blood flow through there was faster. So they were getting more blood in through their muscle back into, or through the artery down to the muscle, but they did that without widening the artery. It was like it was going faster, something called vascular conductance, which was pretty interesting. And it kind of makes sense from, not to go into like a deep dive on endothelial function, but athletes and people who are exercising regularly, they generally have very little room to improve their endothelial function. If you measure their blood vessel function, it's so good that you almost wouldn't expect to see that improvement. And they talk about that in the paper, but that's just pretty well known. It's like if you take trained people and train them more, their actual ability of their blood vessels to dilate doesn't really improve that much. And especially cyclists, they're using their legs all the time. You're not going to expect to see that improvement.
Yeah, because they're so adapted.
Exactly, yeah. Their vessels are already just like so optimized. You can only widen a blood vessel so much, right?
Exactly. I mean, you at the end of the day, like there is a fixed volume at which, your blood vessels are going to be that.
Yeah, so some of the capillary outcomes you mentioned, capillarization. I mean, that is one of the key improvements that endurance athletes want. You want those tiny little blood vessels. That's where the oxygen actually goes into to get into the muscle eventually.
Yes, and now that you mention, I was just having another thought here. Even though they measured the common femoral artery and they didn't increase the vasodilation, but they did increase, but Ketone-IQ did increase the blood flow, it could also be possible that the vasodilation didn't happen in the femoral artery, but instead it could happen in the cardiovascular system, right?
Yep.
So if the heart is pumping more blood via vasodilation, which we have seen in heart failure studies, Ketone-IQ does increase cardiac output, and it could possibly also be vasodilation. Then you might be able to see increased velocity in the femoral arteries as well. But you're right, if they are already so adapted and so optimized in their femoral arteries, there is not much you can do to improve further except for improving the entire cardiovascular system.
Right. And I mean, now I'm just like thinking of potential study designs, but now I want to see a study on cyclists or athletes where they measure cardiac output, stroke volume, all kinds of stuff. So
I mean, we already see an increase in stroke volume, cardiac output, and ejection fraction in heart failure patients in the Aarhus University paper that was published in December 2025. We have a bigger study coming out in 250 heart failure patients. We're halfway through. So it will be very exciting to see how that is and how that compares to normal, like healthy people as well.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And yeah, so possible vasodilation occurred elsewhere. I mean, it's almost likely that it probably occurred elsewhere. And it's like if you're only measuring one, you can also measure endothelial function in the arms. You can measure it, several different sites in the body. So you're just measuring it in one place, and it didn't improve in the study, but again, like we mentioned, the blood flow conductance, the blood flow kind of velocity actually did improve. With regards to the more microvascular function, I think one of the key outcomes we sort of mentioned already was the the tissue reoxygenation index. So can you talk about how that maybe changed during the study?
You might need to.
I could potentially talk about it too.
Go for it.
Basically, they just show. I mean, this was one of the less discussed outcomes, I think, but the reoxygenation index is, they sort of measure the rate at which the muscles regain kind of their oxygen during that reperfusion protocol that we just mentioned. So the blood's going back to the muscles. How quickly do they kind of take up and utilize that oxygen, saturate with oxygen? And they did show that increased, I think, by about 6 to 8% with the ketones. I think before we maybe move on I think it's important that like most of these effects they showed were independent of whether they were in hypoxia or normoxia. So it wasn't like this improved in hypoxia, but it didn't in normoxia. It was essentially the same. So it was like a group effect versus like this 4-way interaction, I guess, or 3-way interaction. So
it's a ketone effect rather than
environment, right? So whether you're in hypoxia or normoxia, just grouping them together, it improves overall versus the control condition. So just important to note because I think if you were to just show effects in hypoxia, people might be like, oh well, I'm never in hypoxia, so this doesn't apply to me. So it applies in both conditions.
Or if you just show it in hypoxia, it was like, well, I'm just gonna do altitude training, so I don't need ketone-IQ because it's free.
Right, but it's additive to hypoxia,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's key there as well. Okay, so the big finding then here too, EPO. Let's talk about EPO. So what is EPO? Give us a breakdown of what it is, and then what happened to EPO in this study when they use ketones.
Erythropoietin. It is a signaling molecule that is being synthesized in your bone marrow. It sends, no, sorry, not in your bone marrow. It is synthesized in, I believe, adipose tissue.
I think bone marrow produces EPO.
It sends signal to the bone marrow,
yes.
to create blood vessels.
In terms of where EPO is produced,
now I have to look it up. Now I have to look it up now.
We can look it up on air. No shame here.
I know.
Or the kidneys, I think.
Kidneys, you're right.
EPO,
kidneys. Yep. So let me do that again.
Checking our physiology.
So EPO is produced in the kidneys, and it's a signal that is sent to the bone marrow to create more red blood cells. And the stimulus is usually hypoxia, which is low oxygen environment, because your body is telling you that, okay, I am low on oxygen, I need oxygen to survive, I need oxygen to create energy, and I need energy everywhere in my body, especially my brain, my heart, my muscles. So what I'm going to do is upregulate red blood cells, which is the main cell that carries oxygen throughout my body, so I can increase oxygen delivery to adapt to my low oxygen environment. So in this study, what we have seen is that increase of 15% of erythropoietin regardless of hypoxic environment. So just ketone-IQ itself is, correct me if I'm wrong, it increases the erythropoietin production regardless of normoxic or hypoxic environment.
Yeah, that's correct. And so again, we mentioned you're going to get a little bit of EPO production with exercise. You're going to get a little bit with hypoxia, but what you're showing is ketone is having this additive effect. So when you take ketones, you're getting that. I mean, a 15% increase. And they showed that, I think it was at the 6 hour or 7 hour, 7 hour time point after exercise. So I mean, a 15% increase is pretty large. I mean, I think it's comparable to what you might see with some other interventions. I don't know how that compares to like blood doping EPO.
I think it's like
but
that is X, like a number X times
right,
EPO,
of course, because you're taking
rather than like 15%,
EPO,
you're like few 100%.
Right. So you're not taking performance enhancing drugs here, people. Well, you are, but they're not banned performance enhancing drugs. It's just increasing your EPO. But I think the EPO for endurance athletes, that's going to be one of the major findings there, because I mean, if you don't want to do, say, altitude training, or you can't do altitude training, most people, I mean, like myself or anybody who's not an elite athlete, you're not going to be doing altitude training. So our ketones,
and also some people don't live in
like
anywhere near
right. I live
altitude.
here in Austin, Texas. I'm doing my training. I mean, I'm never going to go to altitude, so I have humidity at my side. I can use the sauna or hot bath, and now I can use exogenous ketones. I mean, it seems like a hyperbolic statement, but it's almost an altitude mimetic. You're like mimicking altitude training in a way by taking ketones. So I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that. In terms of EPO, there are other adaptations that go on, but a lot of these are overlapping with the effects of altitude, which is pretty remarkable.
I like that. I mean, for the longest time, it's been shown that ketone is a fast mimicking, fasting mimetic, and now we can have altitude mimetic.
You can really just cheat biology, I guess.
I know.
They say there's no free lunch in biology, but yeah, you can fast without actually having to fast, or be in ketosis without doing a ketogenic diet. Get the effects of altitude without going to altitude. So
exactly.
Pretty remarkable findings that we're seeing here. I want to talk a little bit about the mechanisms then by which all of this is happening, because I think that's one of the key things. Like when we're seeing all these effects and how they're happening, that was going back to that overtraining study. I think that was one of the main things where it was like, we're seeing these benefits. They're experiencing less overreaching symptoms. They are improving their work output capacity after overtraining. But it was like, what the hell's going on? We don't know the mechanism by which this is working, because they didn't really, they measured it. What did they measure in that study? It was like FGF21 or some molecule in that study.
It was some inflammatory
some
biomarker.
Sort of inflammatory marker, and that was the only thing they measured.
Yeah.
Like, this might be a novel overtraining biomarker. And I've seen that actually in some recent studies too. The FGF21. I think I'm getting that molecule right. But that was like the only mechanism that they kind of proposed. So this is sort of following up on that, and we actually do have some mechanisms. So you mentioned ET1, endothelin-1, PGC1 alpha. Can we talk a little bit about those in terms of like the mechanisms by which these effects might be happening?
Yeah, I mean, we probably talked about it quite a bit already. Like, PGC1 alpha, it's around mitochondrial energetics. We're looking at endothelin-1, which is essentially a vasoconstrictor that gets inhibited so that it can vasodilate. It may not be in the site itself, in the femoral arteries, but it could be in the other parts of the vascular, cardiovascular system. We're looking at VEGF, which is essentially very, very strong signal of new blood vessels formation. You will see an increase in VEGF. And again, do remember this is an acute study, right? So they take it and they were in the hypoxic chamber for 6 hours. I was even pleasantly surprised to see that we saw a change in the biomarkers, because these kind of changes we would expect for chronic use, because then you actually have time to build out new blood vessels. You have time to adapt to the hypoxic environment. And one, throughout my PhD, my whole PhD was in cardiovascular metabolism in hypoxia. And one thing I realized is that working with hypoxia is really cool because you can see an acute effect. Because our body is so sensitive to the change in oxygen around us that you will see the physiological change, versus if you want to see change in other physiological biomarkers, like say multivitamins, you're looking at different micronutrients, that will take months before you see a change. But once you change the oxygen environment, you will see the adaptation almost immediately.
Yeah, and even with something like PGC1 alpha or AMPK, you might expect like 24 to 48 hours out. Again, maybe they don't have these time points in the study, so it would be fascinating to have like a 24-hour, 48-hour follow-up. But to see those happening in 6 hours is really cool to see that signal. So yeah, the logical next, like, where does this go now is how does this translate to the actual adaptations to exercise in terms of VO2 max or actual exercise performance? I mean, that's kind of, I think, where the next applications of this go, like a long-term training study. And obviously those take a bit longer, but you got to start with the acute study to see like, okay, well, it's changing on a cellular level in the very acute phase. And then while we can't directly say that that's going to actually like increase your maybe blood vessel growth over time, that's how it happens first, is these repeated acute effects, which is the concept of exercise training, but also the concept of these additive effects of ketones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think next step is definitely, the long-term adaptation, the long-term effect of the changes of the biomarkers, as you said. And I think what could also be very interesting is to look at the inflammatory biomarkers over time on top of these different adaptation mechanisms, so that we are looking at the doubling, tripling effect of adaptation to oxygen, adaptation to the training, and then the recovery, physiological recovery, and as well as the mitigation of inflammation that can then help you train better the next day or then 2 days later.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that would then have applications for the overtraining that we were talking about too. It's like if they allow you to recover better when added to adequate nutrition, obviously like plays a role. And 100%. We didn't talk about that when we were discussing the methods of this study, but basically all of the groups were controlled they were just on like a standardized, pretty well controlled like performance diet. So it was, high carbs, proteins after workouts, recovery drinks. So they weren't just taking ketones and saying fasted for 6 hours after their exercise and seeing these benefits. So you got to pair it with the adequate recovery nutrition, and obviously they're like cyclists, so they're not going to just, if you did this in maybe recreational adults or just like college students or something, they might have like had them fast or something. But I think that was the other interesting thing about this study, was that because let's be honest, there are some of the studies, using ketones where it's like, oh, you take ketones versus nothing and you're fasted. Well, okay, it's going to improve something, right? But if paired with really, really solid, adequate nutrition, you're still seeing these effects. So I think that that's important as well. So do your general nutrition and add ketones on top of that. And that's what they did in this study. It was very well controlled in terms of all of that nutrition stuff.
I mean, you got to get everything else in control in order to isolate the effects, right? But I like that point that you really emphasize here, like making sure that for us everyday people, like I'm not an elite athlete, right? If I am training regularly, I'm generally a healthy person. How can I make sure that I get the full benefit of ketones is by dialing in the other aspects of my training, of my nutrition, sleep, stress, and all of that.
Yeah. So, you brought up people who aren't elite athletes. I'm not an elite athlete. You're not an elite athlete. Most people may be listening to this.
You're like 1 foot in already.
Sub-elite, semi-elite. That's what they refer to it as. Semi-elite athlete, I guess. Recreational amateur, I guess, is what I refer to it as.
I'm just a former fat kid. That's the difference.
Training at a high level, but I'm not an elite athlete. So regardless, I think most people may be watching this, if they're not elite athletes, like, what are the potential health applications of this? I mean, I know you've done a lot of work in cardiovascular disease, but like, where do you see the potential health applications of this? Because, and I'll let you go and then I'll kind of, talk about it. But like, obviously, like, I think that there is some potential application here for like, well, not everybody wants to just like enhance their athletic performance, but could ketones allow you to enhance the health adaptations to exercise as well?
Oh, so many things that I can talk about. If we're talking about vasodilation, we're talking about increasing blood flow. Think about increasing blood flow to your brain, right? You're increasing activity in your brain. You're increasing the substrates and fuel being transported into your brain and therefore creating more, productivity. Thinking about your cardiovascular health. Cardiovascular disease is one of the top killers in the world, and it is the major comorbidity of all these chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and all of that. Having an improved cardiovascular system by improving the vascular function and improving the oxygen delivery, that is very important, right? If you are coupling that with exercise, obviously exercise needs to be there. It has been shown again and again that it improves quality of life in aging individuals, in individuals who even want to perform cognitively better. Exercise does help as well. It increases BDNF. It increases, the size of your hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and memory. So all of this essentially can be tied in together to better fuel delivery, better blood flow, better oxygenation, and better energy production. And when you have better energy production, all your organs are essentially functioning better, leading to a healthier, better, more balanced life.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, what happens in the athletes is, athletes are humans. So if you're a person and you're adapting like these athletes are, you're going to get all those benefits for the brain, blood vessel function, as you mentioned, like, and exercise, again, it does all those things. But like, if you can take ketones just on perhaps like we'll call it maybe like a therapeutic dose rather than like a performance enhancing dose or something like that, but just to enhance the health benefits.
We're going to mushroom territory now.
Yeah,
museum dose.
Start microdosing ketones. New thing. Yeah, I think that's a great application, a great way to frame it. So I think, and that's kind of like the chronic health effects, and then even acutely, I see a way that people could be using these. I mean, it's very well known that like if you do high intensity exercise, you do any exercise session, people feel better after, and in that acute phase, a couple hours afterwards, your brain generally works better. You have increased blood flow to the brain. So I'm thinking of like in the acute phase, if I'm taking ketones after my workout, and for most people who are jumping off their workout and going to their 9 to 5 or doing something, business executives, anybody podcasting, like we're doing right now, you want to be performing sharper, have better blood flow in that immediate post-exercise window. Taking ketones during it could do that too. So there's kind of these acute effects of how it might work directly from this study, but then just enhancing the vascular adaptations to exercise, I think, and improving cardiovascular health, massive application.
And that's a great point, because there is something called exercise-induced hypoglycemia, right? As everyone knows, when you exercise, your blood glucose will drop, because you are using the glucose, right? And when your blood glucose drop, what does that do? Your brain has less access to glucose. And if you are not on a ketogenic diet, you don't have access to ketones, and your glucose is already low. So your brain will automatically lower its function. It will downregulate its function, and therefore make you having brain fog. You'll have difficulty in decision making, reaction time, memory recall, all of those functions, right? But having ketones in there, it supplies the brain with the energy, with the fuel that it needs, And two, with the study results, we're looking at improved vascular function, improved oxygen delivery as well, on top of actually supplying the fuel that the brain needs. Now you have the amazing combo that makes sure that you have the productivity that you need after exercise at work.
Yeah, totally. So, and anybody who's, used exogenous ketones or ketone precursors like Ketone-IQ basically knows that, you definitely can feel those effects. And granted, I don't have repeated measures on myself versus placebo, but it's, subjectively, we just took a ketone before this podcast and I exercised. And so I'm feeling the effects of like what we're talking about right now.
I haven't done my fasted cardio today. I have been quite consistent lately. I think in the past 6 months, it started off by, I think I was doing like 3-4 times a week. In the morning, fasted, I'll just walk up a hill, cardio zone 2, I'll take ketone for about 15 grams of ketones. And then it slowly evolved. It's kind of weird because it evolved to like daily now. I just have to do it now.
It's addicting, right?
It just becomes a habit now. Granted, I haven't gotten into running yet, but
that's the next step. The walking is just a gateway.
But because I do lift 4 times a week and I go quite heavy as well. So I feel like whenever I run, I get so sore that it affects my recovery.
Right, and you don't want that. You really want to optimize like your main thing, And it's the same with me. If I'm performing strength training so heavy that I can't run the next day, well, that's counterproductive to what your goal is. So I think walking is fine. Do you use a weighted vest at all?
I have one. I haven't used it for a while. Because right now, even if I walk at 3.5 miles per hour, I can maintain about 120 heartbeats per minute. And if I do, sometimes I do the paper in the Japanese paper that was published on interval walking. I don't know if you've seen that. The 3 minutes incline walk faster, 3 minutes flat slower. So I will do 3 minutes at 10 degrees at 4 miles per hour, and then 3 minutes flat at 3 miles per hour. Do that for 5 times each. So that's 30 minutes in total. I'll be like sweating already. Yeah. Then after the incline, I'll be around like 150 beats per minute. My heart will be racing quite high. And even at the lower one, I'll go down to like 140, 130 minimum. And then I'll have to go back up again.
Yeah, so you probably don't need a weighted vest. Yeah. Obviously, you'd be at almost like maximum VO2 max if you put on 30, 40 pounds.
Right, exactly. So I do that, and then I'll finish that off. After half an hour, I'll finish that off with a normal walking for maybe 20-30 minutes, or elliptical for 20-30 minutes. Sometimes if I feel ambitious, I'll go on a Stairmaster for 20 minutes.
Yeah, Stairmasters are tough. I haven't gotten into that yet, but...
You haven't?
No.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, I guess. I don't do a lot of treadmill stuff in general. I'm either on...
I know. Runners usually hate running on treadmills.
I use it if I have to, but it's kind of the last resort if the weather's bad enough, which in Austin, Texas, it really is. I use a treadmill a couple times a year.
It's raining outside today.
Oh, rain's okay. Like if it's like 50-mile-per-hour winds or snow, which snow doesn't happen here, but windy would.
I see. Yeah.
Rain's okay.
That shows how different we are, because I am like such a nerd that I'm like, I'll do it indoors. I'll do it on a treadmill. I'll watch my show while I'm doing it, and like just turn off my brain.
I think that's a good way to do it. I do that when I'm on the bike. If I'm doing like a lot of cross training on the stationary bike, that's like my favorite thing to do, and I'll do that inside. But running for me is that I like to do it outdoors.
Everyone. I just growing up in a tropical country in Malaysia, I just come to not like the sun too much because I burn.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. I think there's one more thing I want to talk about just regarding this study. It's kind of like the elephant in the room, and people always bring it up, is the dose that they used and the cost of like the ketones. It's relevant because, ketones are not, I wouldn't say that they are expensive, but they're not inexpensive. But I think in terms of like other supplements, probably, just as costly. But whenever I posted out a study using ketones, whether it's Ketone-IQ or some other ketone ester, and saying, oh, these effects are so cool, usually the first question is like, well, what was the dose, and like how much is that? People are always then going to calculate like, oh, that's $50 like a day for my exercise session or whatever. So, and I think it's a valid question, because like if we're going to apply this and if people are going to use it, it's like, well, if I want to use this exact dose, like I'm gonna have to use a decent amount of ketone product. But you and I were talking about this, and it's essentially just my first comment was, of course, but you're seeing pretty, granted we don't have the training data, but these acute effects, you're seeing pretty massive effects. So like, you're going to have to use something that's potent, and something that's potent is going to be expensive. If you want a supplement to work, you buy a high quality supplement, and that supplement is going to be expensive. You just don't go and buy the cheapest off the counter supplement to do that.
Yeah.
So, and I think the same thing is when it applies to ketones. It's like you're getting this added benefit of exercise that's pretty large and pretty effective, shown in athletes. That's something that you're likely going to pay for. So I guess the question is like that you have to ask yourself is like, what is it worth? What are the adaptations worth? What is the potential brain function worth, or whatever you're using ketones for?
Yeah,
like,
and we were talking before we record, is like how expensive is a bad day to you, or how
Right.
much is a good day worth
Right.
for you, right? And if I go to the other extreme end, let's look at Liver King, right? When they found out his supplements, his hormones are like worth tens of $1,000s, right? A month.
Yeah.
So does it work? I mean, look at him. Like clearly it works, and the effect is very drastic, but you pay the cost for it, right? So then you get the other end, some multivitamins, which has very low bioavailability. You pay maybe $1 a day. You don't even know if it works. You measure your blood tests every year, and there's no change.
Right.
And you're in the normal healthy range, and that's about it. So I think ketone is good in the middle, where it's not peptide, it's not going to give you like super jacked physique or like super like flash kind of speed, right?
Right.
But it helps you day to day to perform at your best, to be able to spend time with your family, and you can train, and you have energy to still work and deal with your coworkers if they are difficult, and you still have the patience.
Yep.
I think that is worth a lot, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, how much those little things would cost you.
I think so too. And I mean, people pay for everything. I mean, what you brought up when we were talking about this outside is like, okay, most people, I mean, a lot of people make their coffee at home, but there are people who will go to Starbucks every day.
Yeah.
You'll spend $5 to $10 on a coffee. I mean, a Ketone-IQ shot is 10 grams of ketones. Well, let's call it $4 or $5 a shot. I think if you bought them in bulk. So I mean, a ketone is, say, a coffee, and I mean, what's a coffee giving you, and what's that worth to you? What's a ketone? So it's like, we're not trying to justify like, oh, this is, you should buy them, they're not that expensive. Like, yeah, it's a cost, but I mean, you pay for everything. And if you're an athlete, if you're somebody who's trying to perform well, what's that going to be worth? For an athlete, that regimen could be worth, winning races, more sponsorships. For somebody who increases their productivity, that just means more money in general. So I mean, you pay for everything. So I just don't think that the criticism of these are expensive, and so this study is useless really works, because, well, okay, you don't have to use them, but if you want to, then you can. People spend a lot of money on stuff for exercise.
Yeah.
You spend money on a gym membership. You
Correct.
spend money on supplements. You spend money on
Proteins.
recovery, protein powders. I mean, you spend money on everything, and it's like, you just need to think of these as the same thing. They're giving you a legitimate benefit. So are you willing to pay for it or not? If you're not, then you don't have to use them.
It's optional.
It's optional.
Yeah.
Everything is optional. Like, all supplements are optional. So the criticism that a supplement is expensive, I always find it silly, regardless of whether it's ketones or not. It's like, you don't use it then.
I
You
know.
don't have to use it.
I love the mentality.
We want everybody to use Ketone-IQ, by the way, but you don't
I know.
have to.
I love the mentality of like, now we are obliged to make it cheaper. It's like, oh, you're telling us all this good stuff. Now make it cheaper. It's your responsibility. I'm like, yes, we know that.
Right.
And we have tried, because we went from ketone ester, which
I mean,
was...
they're so much cheaper than they used to be.
It used to be
$20 a bottle.
30, 33. Try like $100 for 3 shots.
Yeah.
$100 for 3 shots.
I remember
That-
when they were,
and now it was $5. So go back and check. Like back in 2017, 2019, it was $100 for a pack of 3 shots of ketone monoester.
Crazy to think about.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's like 25 grams, but even gram per gram, it's much higher compared to what we are today. And let's hope that if more competition comes out, more studies comes out, we have scale of economy, and we'll get it cheaper. My hope and wish is to have ketones so scalable, so common, so ubiquitous that it becomes as cheap as whey protein, as creatine, as collagen, so that everyone will have access to it. Because we're not just talking about exercise performance, about athletic performance, we're talking about overall physiological benefit that could help an average everyday person who exercise regularly or not, or even people who are in the disease population and struggling with cardiovascular disease, for example, or Alzheimer's disease, or any neurodegenerative disease. They are seeing benefits now with ketones. So coming from a family that's ridden with chronic diseases, I really hope one day that it will get cheap enough that everyone has access to it, because I would love to bring it to Asia, back to Asia where I come from, because right now they can't afford this, like in the USD. And if we can, given how Malaysia, where I'm from, is like second highest obese Southeast Asian country now. I'm like, wow. People here, my friends, they're like, wow, you've got obese people in Asia? I'm like, yeah, you do. You do. I mean, India obesity rate is very high right now. Like China is climbing up. I think it's the introduction of all these fast foods and lifestyle changes. So having such a product, I hope that one day it will, sort of be worldwide and accessible to everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes ketones just as a product and Ketone-IQ just so kind of interesting and exciting to me, is that it is like broadly applicable. I mean, most all of the conditions that you mentioned, they have studies in using exogenous ketones in them: diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease, things like that. A lot of case studies even. But then, I mean, so the applications are so broad, and I mean, my interest in ketones started off with the exercise stuff, and now, and I mean, I don't say this in a bad way, but like that's almost the least interesting application to me, is how it's going to actually make me do better in my workout. That's like the least benefit. It's like recovery, brain health, all these areas are a little bit more interesting to me now. I mean, I'm still interested in whether they might work during exercise and how, but yeah, there's just, the applications are so wide ranging. So it would be cool to see, these scalable, and everybody just has a little separate spot in their fridge, like for exogenous ketones, and you can kind of take it as like as a daily supplement.
Exactly.
That's the dream, I guess.
Yeah, that's the takeaway. I mean, we're always pushing the science forward, trying to understand how ketone affects people's lives in all aspects, not just performance, but also cognition, and diseases. And we want it to stay as a food product so that it doesn't get labeled as a pharmaceutical, where then people start exploiting it and overpricing it and getting all these like regulatory red tapes around it. We want it to be a food product that also has drug-like properties that helps people improve their health.
Yeah, well, I think Ketone-IQ is doing a great job of that, and I mean, part of that is sort of when these studies come out, educating people on it, like you and I are doing today. So I'm glad we could sit down and break down this study.
And more to come.
And more to come, I think. We'll tease some of those studies, but it's good to know that we have some more content to that we can sit down in the future and chat about, because it's always fun, especially when it comes to this endurance sports stuff. Is just, I could talk about it all day. So whenever there's a new study,
live, breathe endurance sports.
I downloaded this study and I was like excited to read it in bed at night, like
nerd,
instead of watching TV.
Finally, someone out-nerds me.
I'm trying. That's the goal. All right, Latt. Well, it was great to chat with you today. Anything else you want to say before we land this thing?
No, I think this is a great paper. I'll be talking about this paper for the next few months, and we have more studies coming out looking at cognition, how exhaustive exercise reduces your brain blood sugar, and how it affects your cognition, and how ketones can help improve that. We also have some studies on appetite suppression that's coming out. So that's super interesting, including GLP-1, effect of ketone on GLP-1.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We saw significance
Exciting.
So
cool.
I just got presented this week on the data.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that's exciting. We a lot to look forward to. And yeah, I like this study because now I can have something in my pocket when I talk about why I use exogenous ketones.
Why Ketone-IQ?
Why Ketone-IQ? The argument was always, oh, well, these studies aren't esters and you use Ketone-IQ. But now I have a study that I can show that Ketone-IQ does pretty much the same thing. So it's all about getting your BHB levels up there, really. That's all it comes down to.
And then it comes down to price and taste.
Exactly. And in terms of that, Ketone-IQ is up at the top. A bit biased, but,
Yeah.
I think so.
There you go.
All right. Thanks a lot, Latt.
Thank you.